I know how this sounds. I know exactly how insane this is going to seem. And honestly, if someone had told me this story 5 years ago, I would have laughed in their face. But I'm telling you right now, with complete clarity and stone-cold sobriety, that what happened to me in March of 2019 was real. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, picked apart every detail, tried to rationalize it in every way possible, and I keep coming back to the same impossible conclusion. Those things at my door weren't children. I don't know what they were, but they weren't human. This happened when I was living in Flagstaff, Arizona, in this little rental house on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just a two-bedroom place with a carport and a yard that was mostly dirt and weeds. I was working night shifts at a hospital doing medical coding, so my schedule was completely backwards from normal people. I'd get home around 7 in the morning, sleep until mid-afternoon, then have a few hours to myself before heading back in around 11 at night. It was a lonely existence, if I'm being honest. My girlfriend had moved out about 6 months earlier, and I hadn't really made the effort to maintain friendships when I was awake while everyone else was asleep. The isolation didn't bother me much most of the time. I'd gotten used to it. I'd come home, make some breakfast that was really dinner, watch Netflix until I couldn't keep my eyes open, then crash hard until my alarm went off. Rinse and repeat. The neighborhood was quiet during the day, which I appreciated. Mostly older folks who kept to themselves, a few younger families where the parents worked from home. I'd wave to my neighbor Dan when I saw him getting his mail. Had a nodding acquaintance with the woman 2 doors down who had the 3 German shepherds, but that was about it. March 18th, 2019. I remember the date because it was 2 days after my birthday, which I'd spent entirely alone eating Chinese takeout and watching The Office reruns. Pathetic, I know, but that's where I was at in my life. I'd gotten home from work that morning feeling particularly drained. We'd been short-staffed, and I'd had to process twice as many charts as usual. My eyes hurt from staring at the computer screen, and I had that gritty, exhausted feeling you get when you've been awake too long under fluorescent lights. I made myself some scrambled eggs and toast, ate them standing at the counter because I couldn't be bothered to sit down, then headed straight to bed. I'd closed all the curtains like I always did, making the bedroom as dark as possible. I was asleep within minutes of my head hitting the pillow. I don't usually remember my dreams, but that day I kept having these weird, fragmented ones about being lost in a hospital where all the hallways looked the same and I couldn't find the exit. Not quite nightmares, but unsettling enough that I kept almost waking up, then drifting back down into another variation of the same theme. I woke up around 3:30 in the afternoon. I could tell it was later than usual because the quality of light coming through the edges of the curtains had that golden late afternoon tone instead of the harsh midday brightness. I felt like shit, honestly. That heavy, disoriented feeling you get when you've slept too long or too hard. My mouth was dry, and I had that weird headache that sits right behind your eyes. I shuffled out to the kitchen and chugged a glass of water, then another. Checked my phone and saw a few texts from my mum asking if I wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday, and a notification that my credit card payment was due. Exciting stuff. I thought about making coffee, but decided I'd just grab some from the gas station on my way to work later. I turned on the TV more for background noise than anything else and settled onto the couch with my laptop to waste time on Reddit until I had to start getting ready. Around 4:15, I heard a car door slam outside. not unusual, people came and went in the neighborhood all the time. But then I heard it again and again, like someone was repeatedly opening and closing their car door. It was annoying enough that I actually got up and went to the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. There was a van parked across the street, one of those older conversion vans from the 90s, dark blue or maybe black with tinted windows. I'd never seen it in the neighborhood before. The side door was open and I could see someone moving around inside, but the angle and the tinting made it impossible to see clearly. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, didn't see anything particularly interesting, and let the curtain fall back. Figured it was someone visiting one of the neighbors, maybe moving some furniture or equipment. I went back to the couch and forgot about it. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door. Not a doorbell ring. My doorbell had been broken since I moved in, and I'd never bothered to fix it. But a knock, soft, almost tentative. 3 taps, evenly spaced. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I never got visitors at this hour. My first thought was that it might be a delivery, but I hadn't ordered anything. My second thought was that it might be one of the neighbors needing something, though that had never happened before. I got up from the couch and walked to the door. We didn't have a peephole, another thing the landlord had never gotten around to installing despite promising he would. So I called out, "Yeah? Who is it?" There was a pause, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then a child's voice said, "Can you help us?" The phrasing struck me as odd immediately. Not "can you help me," but us. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob. The voice had been young, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and it had this flat quality to it that I couldn't quite place. Not scared or urgent, despite asking for help, just neutral. "Help you with what?" I called through the door. Another pause, longer this time, then, "We need to come inside." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't tell you why. There was something wrong about the way the kid phrased it. Not, "Can we come inside?" or "We need help," but "We need to come inside." Like coming inside was the help, like that was the whole point. I looked through the narrow window next to the door, the one with the frosted glass that distorted everything. I could make out 2 shapes on my front porch, small, child-sized. They were just standing there, not moving. I couldn't see any detail through the frosted glass, just dark silhouettes. "Where are your parents?" I asked, still not opening the door. Something in my gut was telling me not to, and I've learned over the years to trust that instinct. "We need to use your phone," the voice said, ignoring my question entirely. "We need to come inside to use your phone." "I can bring a phone out to you," I offered. "You can use it on the porch." Silence. Long enough that I started to think maybe they'd left. Then, "We can't come in unless you invite us. Please invite us inside." My hand dropped away from the doorknob like it had burned me. The way the kid said it, the exact phrasing, it triggered something in the back of my mind. I'd read something once, years ago, probably on some stupid internet forum, about kids showing up at people's doors and asking to be invited inside. I couldn't remember the details, just that vague sense of having encountered the idea before, and that it had been in the context of something bad. "I think you should go home," I said, and I heard my voice shake a little. "I can't help you. Please." The voice was still flat, still emotionless, but there was something under it now. Not pleading exactly, but insistent, persistent. "We need to come inside. We need you to invite us in." "No," I said. "I'm sorry, but no. You need to leave." I backed away from the door, my heart starting to pound in my chest for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. They were just kids, right? Just kids who needed help. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that door, to not open it under any circumstances. That's when the knocking started again. Not the soft, tentative taps from before, but harder, more insistent, rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, over and over. I stood in my living room, frozen, listening to it continue. It went on for at least 2 minutes, maybe longer. I kept waiting for them to give up, to leave, but they just kept knocking with that same mechanical rhythm. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening for footsteps or voices or any indication they'd actually left. Nothing. The house was completely quiet, except for the TV murmuring in the background and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I crept back toward the door, moving slowly, trying not to make any sound. I don't know why I was being quiet. It wasn't like they didn't know I was home, but something about the situation made me want to be as unobtrusive as possible. I looked through the frosted window again. They were still there, still standing in exactly the same positions, exactly the same postures. They hadn't moved at all. They were just standing there, facing the door, waiting. "You need to leave," I called out, louder this time, trying to sound firm and authoritative. "I'm going to call the police if you don't leave right now." No response. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there. I pulled out my phone and actually did dial 911, but I didn't hit call yet. I wanted to see if the threat alone would work. "I'm calling them right now," I said. "I'm not kidding." "We just need to come inside," the voice said again, and I realized with a start that I couldn't tell which one of them was speaking. The sound wasn't coming from a specific direction, it was just there, like it was coming through the door itself. "If you would just invite us in, we can explain everything. We really need your help." My finger hovered over the call button. What would I even tell them? That there were kids on my porch asking to use my phone? That I felt scared for no reason I could adequately explain? They'd think I was insane. Hell, I was starting to think I was insane. I decided to try looking through a different window. I moved to the living room, to the window that looked out onto the porch from a different angle. I pulled the curtain aside very slowly, just an inch or two, trying to see them without being obvious about it. I could see them better from this angle. 2 figures, both child-sized, both wearing hooded sweatshirts, despite it being a warm March afternoon. I couldn't see their faces, the hoods were pulled up, and they were standing in a way that kept their features in shadow. But I could see their hands, and that's when I noticed something that made my mouth go dry. They weren't moving at all, not fidgeting, not shifting weight from foot to foot, not doing any of the small unconscious movements that people, especially children, constantly make. They were absolutely still, like mannequins, like statues. I let the curtain fall back and pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might actually be having a panic attack. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Kids don't stand that still. Kids don't talk like that. And what the hell did they mean they couldn't come in unless I invited them? The knocking started again. Same rhythm, same intensity. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. I covered my ears like a child, but I could still hear it, that steady mechanical hammering. It felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only another minute or two. Then it stopped again, and I heard footsteps on the porch. They were moving. I could hear the wooden boards creaking as they walked. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps went to the left, toward the side of the house. I heard them stop, and then there was a knock on a different window, the bathroom window. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Then footsteps again, moving around to the back of the house. I followed the sound through my house, staying well back from the windows, tracking their movement. They were circling the house. I heard knocking at the back door. 3 knocks. Then the kitchen window. 3 knocks. Then the bedroom window. 3 knocks. They were checking every possible entry point. I was shaking now, actually trembling, and I'd broken out in a cold sweat. I grabbed my phone with both hands and hit call on 911. It rang twice, 3 times, and then a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? There are people trying to get into my house, I said, and my voice came out high and tight. They're going around knocking on all the windows and doors. Are they trying to break in, sir? Have they damaged any property? No, they're just knocking, but they won't leave. I told them to leave and they won't. How many people are there? 2. They look like kids, but something's wrong. They're acting really weird. There was a pause and I could hear the dispatcher typing. Okay, sir, what's your address? I gave it to her, stumbling over the numbers, even though I'd lived there for almost 2 years. Officers are on their way. Can you describe these individuals? I can't really see them clearly. They're wearing hooded sweatshirts. I think they're kids, like 10 or 12 maybe, but they keep asking to come inside, and they keep saying they need to be invited in. Are they asking for help? Do they seem distressed? No, that's the thing. They don't seem distressed at all. They're not acting normal, and they're knocking on every window now like they're checking for a way in. Sir, I need you to stay on the line with me and stay away from the doors and windows. Officers are about 3 minutes away. I paced in the center of my living room, clutching the phone to my ear, listening to the knocking continue its circuit around my house. Back door, kitchen window, bedroom window, bathroom window, front door, living room window. Over and over in the same order, the same 3 knocks at each point. They're still going around the house, I told the dispatcher. They're knocking at every window in the same pattern. The officers are almost there, she assured me. Just stay inside and stay on the line. Then, abruptly, the knocking stopped. I froze, listening. Silence. Complete silence. They stopped, I whispered into the phone. Can you see if they're still on the property? I crept to the front window and looked out through the curtain. The porch was empty. I moved to the side window. Nothing. I could see the street through the gaps in the fence, and I didn't see the van anymore either. I don't see them, I said. The van that was parked across the street is gone too. What van? There was a van parked out there when they first showed up. Dark blue or black, older conversion van, tinted windows. Did you see anyone get out of the van? No, I just saw it parked there. I heard a siren in the distance, getting closer. I think I hear the police, I said. Stay inside until they knock and identify themselves, the dispatcher instructed. The siren got louder and then shut off, and through the window I saw a patrol car pull up in front of my house. 2 officers got out and I watched them approach the porch cautiously, hands near their belts. One of them knocked on the door, normal knocking, not that mechanical 3-tap pattern, and called out, "Flagstaff PD." "They're here," I told the dispatcher. "You can hang up and let them in. Thank you for calling, sir." I ended the call and went to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands. The officers were both young, a man and a woman, and they looked concerned, but not alarmed. You called about people trying to get into your house, the male officer asked. Yeah, I said, and I realized I probably looked insane, wild-eyed and sweating in my pajama pants and t-shirt in the middle of the afternoon. They were going around knocking on all the windows and doors. They said they needed to come inside. Who did you see? The female officer asked, pulling out a notepad. 2 kids, I think. I couldn't see them clearly. They were wearing hooded sweatshirts and they kept their faces down or in shadow, but they were acting really strange. Strange how? I tried to explain it. The flat voice, the repetitive knocking, the way they'd said they needed to be invited in, the unnatural stillness. As I spoke, I could hear how it sounded, like I was some paranoid shut-in freaking out over kids selling candy bars or collecting for a school fundraiser. Did they make any threats? The male officer asked. No, not exactly. They just kept saying they needed to come inside, that they needed me to invite them in. And when I wouldn't, they started going around the house checking all the windows. The officers exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. We'll check around the property, the female officer said. You said there was a van. Dark blue or black. Older conversion van, tinted windows. It was parked across the street, but it's gone now. They spent about 15 minutes walking around my house, checking the yard, the alley behind the property, talking to a few neighbors. I waited inside, feeling simultaneously terrified and stupid. When they came back, they told me they hadn't found anyone and none of the neighbors had seen anything unusual. We'll increase patrols in the area, the male officer said. If they come back, call us immediately. Don't engage with them, don't open the door. After they left, I locked every door and window in the house, checking each one twice. I closed all the curtains. I turned on every light. And then I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand and tried to convince myself that I'd overreacted, that they'd just been kids, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. But I couldn't shake the image of them standing on my porch, absolutely motionless. I couldn't stop hearing that flat, emotionless voice saying, "We need to come inside. We need you to invite us in." I didn't sleep at all before my shift that night. I kept getting up to check the windows to listen for any sound of footsteps or knocking. Nothing happened. The neighborhood was quiet, but I felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes on my house from somewhere I couldn't see. When I finally left for work around 10:30, I practically ran to my car, checking the back seat before I got in, locking the doors immediately. I kept checking my rear-view mirror the entire drive, looking for a dark van, but I never saw one. I told a couple of my co-workers about it during my shift, trying to make it funny, trying to laugh about how paranoid I'd been. But I could tell from their faces that they didn't think it was funny. One of them, this older woman named Cheryl, who'd worked in the ER for 20 years and had seen everything, got really quiet when I described the part about them saying they needed to be invited in. What? I asked her. What is it? I've heard stories, she said carefully. People online talking about kids showing up at their doors, asking to be invited inside. Black-eyed kids, they call them. Black-eyed? Yeah. Solid black eyes, no whites at all. They show up asking for help or asking to use a phone or asking to be let in, and people say there's something wrong with them. Something that makes your gut just scream at you not to let them inside. Did you see their eyes? Another coworker asked me. No, I admitted. They kept their faces down, in the shadows. I couldn't see their faces at all. Good, Cheryl said. People who see their eyes, they say it's traumatizing. They say once you see them, you can't forget them. I tried to laugh it off. Come on, you don't actually believe in that stuff, do you? She shrugged. I'm just saying, you did the right thing not letting them in. Trust your instincts. I spent my break looking it up online, and that's when I fell down the rabbit hole. There were hundreds of stories, maybe thousands, from all over the world. People describing encounters with children who showed up at their doors or their cars, asking to be let in, always with that same insistence that they needed to be invited. And the descriptions were remarkably consistent. The monotone voices, the persistence, the way they wouldn't take no for an answer, and those eyes. Solid black from lid to lid, like looking into empty holes. I read story after story, and they all had the same themes. The children never forced their way in. They always asked permission, always needed to be invited. But people who did let them in, those stories either ended abruptly or described experiences of overwhelming dread, illness, bad luck, or in a few cases, complete mental breakdowns. Some people theorized they were aliens, others said demons. Some thought they were some kind of psychic vampires that fed on fear. A few suggested they were a modern urban legend, mass hysteria, people mistaking ordinary kids for something sinister. But there were too many reports, too many independent descriptions that matched too closely for it to be just storytelling. I drove home when my shift ended just after 7 in the morning, exhausted and wired at the same time. The sun was up, the world looked normal and safe, but I found myself checking my mirrors constantly, looking for that van, looking for any sign of those figures. My house looked exactly as I'd left it. I parked in the carport and hurried to the front door, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I burst inside and locked the door behind me, breathing hard, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop the panic. Everything was fine, empty, quiet, normal. I went around checking all the windows anyway, making sure they were still locked, making sure the curtains were still closed. In the bedroom, I stopped. One of the curtains was open about 6 inches. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd opened it before I left. I didn't think so. I'd closed all the curtains before the police arrived, and I was sure I'd checked them all again before leaving for work. But maybe I'd missed one. Maybe in my paranoid state I'd thought I'd closed it when I hadn't. Or maybe the curtain rod was loose and it had shifted on its own. There were a dozen reasonable explanations. I walked over to close it, and that's when I saw the handprint on the window. Small, child-sized, on the outside of the glass. I jerked back from the window so fast I nearly fell. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I stood there, staring at that handprint, trying to convince myself it had been there before, that I just hadn't noticed it. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd cleaned these windows just a few days ago. I would have seen it. They'd been back while I was gone. They'd come back and they'd looked in my bedroom window and they'd left their mark to let me know. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the handprint from every angle. Then I closed the curtain and pushed my dresser in front of the window. It took everything I had not to just pack a bag and leave, go to a hotel or drive to my parents' house 3 hours away. But that felt like surrender somehow, like letting them win, and I was angry now underneath the fear. I checked every inch of my house again. All the doors and windows were locked. There was no sign of entry. They hadn't gotten in. They couldn't get in without being invited. That's what I kept telling myself as I tried to sleep that day. They can't come in unless you invite them. You didn't invite them. You're safe. The doors are locked. The windows are locked, you're safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt hunted. I dreamed about them. Short, fragmented dreams where I'd be in my house going about normal activities and I'd turn around and they'd be standing there, inside, just standing there watching me with their faces in shadow. I'd wake up gasping, disoriented, and have to walk through the house to reassure myself I was alone. I barely slept 3 hours. When I woke up for real around 4 in the afternoon, I was exhausted and jumpy and seriously considering just breaking my lease and moving back in with my parents until I found a new place. I'd never felt unsafe in this house before, never had any problems in this neighborhood, and now my own home felt contaminated somehow, like they'd marked it as territory. I made coffee and tried to think rationally about what to do. I could call the police again, tell them about the handprint. But what would they do? Dust it for prints? I could already imagine the conversation. So these kids you never clearly saw came back while you were gone and touched your window. And you want us to investigate? I'd sound insane. I thought about calling my landlord, asking if I could install a security camera or something, but I'd have to explain why, and again, how did I explain it without sounding paranoid? And what would a camera even capture? More kids in hoodies standing on my porch? That proved nothing. Around 5, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, local area code. I almost didn't answer, but at the last second I picked up. Hello? Silence. Not dead air, but silence with presence, if that makes sense. Someone was there, breathing, listening. Hello, I said again. Then in that same flat, emotionless voice from before, why didn't you let us in? I hung up immediately, my hands shaking. The phone rang again, same number. I didn't answer. It went to voicemail. A few seconds later, I got the notification that there was a message. Against my better judgment, I listened to it. Heavy breathing, and underneath it, very faintly, what might have been two voices whispering together, but I couldn't make out the words. Then that voice again, still flat, still emotionless. We just want to come inside. We need you to invite us in. Why won't you invite us in? I blocked the number and turned my phone face down on the table, but I kept staring at it like it might ring again from a different number. It didn't, but now they had my phone number somehow. They were escalating. I spent the next few hours researching everything I could find about black-eyed children. Most of it was the same stories repeated across different forums and websites. But I did find some information that seemed consistent across sources. They needed to be invited in. They couldn't cross a threshold without permission. Running water was supposed to offer some protection. Iron, salt, religious symbols, all the standard folklore defenses against malevolent entities. It felt insane even considering it. I'm not a religious person. I've never believed in ghosts or demons or anything supernatural, but I couldn't deny what I'd experienced, and I couldn't shake the absolute certainty that those things on my porch had not been human children. Before I left for work that night, I did something that would have embarrassed me to admit to anyone. I spread salt across all the windowsills and door thresholds. I put iron nails in my pockets. I'd found a box of them in the garage left by a previous tenant. I wore a silver cross that had belonged to my grandmother, even though I'd never worn it before in my life. I felt ridiculous. But I also felt slightly safer. Nothing happened at work that night, and nothing happened when I drove home the next morning. I slept better, maybe 5 hours, and when I woke up there was no handprint on the window, no signs that anyone had been around the house. A week passed, then 2. I started to relax a little, started to convince myself that maybe they'd moved on, found some other target, given up. The salt and the nails started to feel less like protection and more like superstitious nonsense, but I kept them anyway, just in case. I never saw them again. The van never came back to the neighborhood. My phone didn't ring from strange numbers with creepy messages. Everything went back to normal, or as normal as it could be when you'd had that kind of experience. But I never felt completely safe in that house again. I'd be watching TV and get this sudden, overwhelming feeling that I needed to check the windows, make sure no one was standing outside looking in. I'd be falling asleep and jerk awake with the absolute certainty that I'd heard knocking, even though the house was silent. I started leaving lights on all night, running up my electric bill because the darkness felt oppressive in a way it never had before. I moved out about 4 months later, as soon as my lease was up. Told my landlord I was relocating for work, which was a lie. I just couldn't live there anymore. Every time I pulled into that carport, I'd look at the front porch and remember them standing there, motionless, waiting. Every time I was alone in the house, I'd wonder if this would be the time they came back, if they were patient enough to wait me out. I'm in Phoenix now, different city, different house, different life. I have a roommate, which helps. I'm not alone as much, and I've never seen or heard from them again. But I still check my locks obsessively. I still won't answer the door if I'm not expecting someone, especially if I can't see clearly who it is. And I'll never ever open the door to a child asking to come inside, no matter what reason they give. Because here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, the question I can't answer. What would have happened if I'd let them in? What were they, really? And why did they want inside my house so badly? I've read theories. The optimistic ones say they're just kids playing pranks, getting their kicks from scaring adults with creepy behavior and special effects contact lenses. The pessimistic ones range from alien abductions to demonic possession to something feeding on human fear or energy or souls. I don't know what the truth is, but I know what I experienced, and I know what every cell in my body was screaming at me when they stood on my porch. Danger, wrongness, predator, the same instincts that kept our ancestors alive when they encountered something in the dark that looked almost human, but wasn't. We've become so civilized that we've learned to ignore those instincts. We've convinced ourselves that politeness and social obligation override our gut feelings. Someone asks for help, we help them. Someone says they're in trouble, we let them in. That's what good people do, right? But what if that's what they count on? What if they know that we'll override our own survival instincts because we've been socialized to be helpful and trusting? What if they specifically target people who are alone, who might feel guilty about turning away children who claim to need help? I think about the people who did let them in, the ones whose stories end badly or end abruptly. I think about what might have happened to them, and I wonder how many people have opened their doors to those things over the years. How many people ignored their instincts and what the cost was. I'm not saying I know what black-eyed children are. I'm not claiming to have answers. All I can tell you is what happened to me and what I believe in my gut to be true. Those weren't children on my porch. They were something wearing the shape of children, using that form because we're conditioned to help kids, to trust them, to let our guard down around them. And they need permission. They need to be invited. That seems to be a rule they can't break, some cosmic law or limitation, which suggests they're not just malicious humans or pranksters. Those wouldn't need your permission to harm you. This is something else, something that operates under different rules than we do. I still have the pictures of the handprint on my phone. I've shown them to a few people I trust, people who won't think I'm crazy. The print is smaller than a normal child's hand, and if you look closely, and I mean really closely, the pattern of the skin isn't quite right. The ridges are too regular, too uniform, like a computer-generated approximation of a fingerprint rather than a real one. I had nightmares for months afterward. Not about them hurting me, interestingly enough, but about letting them in. I'd dream that I opened the door and invited them inside, and the moment they crossed the threshold, I'd realize what I'd done, and it would be too late. I'd see their faces tilt up, and where their eyes should be, there would just be endless black, like looking into a void. And I'd know with absolute certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake that couldn't be undone. I'd wake up from those dreams gasping, checking every room in my apartment to make sure I was alone, that I hadn't actually done it. The relief when I confirmed I was safe would be overwhelming, but it would be hours before my heart rate would return to normal. My therapist, I started seeing a therapist after this, because how could I not, says I experienced a trauma response and the dreams are my brain's way of processing the fear. She doesn't ask me if I believe they were really supernatural entities. She focuses on the fact that I felt threatened, that my sense of safety was violated, that I experienced real fear regardless of the source. It helps a little, but she also told me something interesting. She said that fear exists for a reason, that our subconscious often picks up on dangers our conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. She said that if every instinct in my body was telling me not to open that door, then regardless of what those things actually were, I was right not to open it. That trusting my gut kept me safe, and that's what matters. I've connected with other people online who've had similar experiences. There are whole forums dedicated to black-eyed children encounters, and the stories are remarkably consistent. The monotone voices, the insistence on being invited in, the feeling of wrongness, the aftermath of fear and paranoia. Some people have had multiple encounters. Some people report them showing up years apart, like they're being tracked somehow. One guy I talked to said he let them in. He was drunk, it was late, and he thought they were neighbor kids who'd gotten locked out. He said the moment they crossed his threshold, he felt this wave of cold wash over him, and when he looked at their faces, their eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just solid black, like shark eyes. He said they stood in his entryway for maybe 30 seconds, not moving, just staring at him, and then they turned and walked out. Didn't say anything, didn't do anything, just left. But for the next 6 months, he said, his life fell apart. He lost his job, his girlfriend left him, he got in a car accident, his dog died, he developed insomnia and anxiety so severe he could barely function. He couldn't prove any of it was connected to them, but the timing was impossible to ignore, and he said he still sees them sometimes, standing across the street from wherever he is, just watching him. Like they own him now, like letting them in gave them some kind of claim on him. I don't know if I believe all of that. It could be coincidence, or paranoia, or mental illness exacerbated by a scary experience. But it could also be true, and that possibility is what keeps me vigilant. I've changed a lot since this happened. I'm more cautious, more suspicious, less trusting. I don't like surprises. I don't like unexpected visitors. I keep my space secure and my circle small. Some people might call that paranoid. I call it learning from experience. And I watch for them. Every time I see kids in hoodies, my heart rate spikes. Every time there's an unexpected knock on my door, I freeze. Every time I'm alone and it's getting dark, I make sure every entry point is secured. I'll probably do this for the rest of my life. The worst part is not knowing what they wanted, not knowing what would have happened if I'd said yes, if I'd invited them in like they kept asking, not knowing if they're still out there somewhere looking for easier targets, not knowing if they'll come back. Because here's what I've realized. They didn't give up because I refused them. They gave up because I'm not worth the effort. There are easier marks out there, people who are more trusting, more naive, more willing to override their instincts in favor of social obligation. People who will open their doors to children asking for help because that's what you're supposed to do. And those people have no idea what they're dealing with. They have no idea that something that looks like a child and sounds like a child might not be a child at all. They don't know the rules, don't know about the invitation, don't know to trust their gut when every cell in their body is screaming danger. I think about those people sometimes. I wonder how many encounters happen every day that we never hear about. I wonder how many people let them in and what happens behind those closed doors. I've thought about going public with my story, putting it out there more widely, warning people. But who would believe me? And even if they did, would it matter? The people who encounter them will have to make the same choice I did in that moment. Trust your instincts or trust your socialization. Listen to your gut or listen to your guilt about not helping. I made my choice. I didn't let them in. And I'm safe, more or less, though I'll never feel truly safe again. The knowledge that they're out there, that they're real, that they want something from us that we don't understand, that knowledge has changed me permanently. So if this ever happens to you, if you ever find yourself faced with children asking to be invited into your home, and something feels wrong, and you can't explain why, but your instincts are screaming at you, listen to them. Don't open the door. Don't let them in. Don't give them permission, because whatever they are, whatever they want, it's nothing good. The rules that bind them exist for a reason. And once you break those rules, once you invite them across your threshold, I don't think there's any going back. I still live with the fear. I still check my locks multiple times before bed. I still can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there they remember me. They remember the house that wouldn't let them in, the person who refused them. And maybe, someday, they'll decide to try again. But I'll be ready. I've got my salt, my iron, my locks, my vigilance. I've got my experience and my instincts and my absolute refusal to be a victim. That's what I tell myself, anyway. On the good days, I almost believe it. On the bad days, I remember that flat, emotionless voice saying, "We need to come inside," and I wonder what would have happened if I'd been just a little bit more tired, a little bit less cautious, a little bit more willing to help. And I'm grateful, so incredibly grateful, that I'll never have to find out.